Thank you so much. I always get very embarrassed because all of you go and find these CVs somewhere in the internet space, and then, all I am is I'm a journalist, which means that it's my job to ask questions and to chronicle the stories of other people. However, at one stage of my life, I did travel for 2 years, traveled all across India, which I was writing columns in the Indian Express, and but eventually it would come out in a book that I call that is titled In Good Faith. I'm very, very pleased to be with all of you here because one of the most important translations of the book is in Marathi. And I'm very, very pleased about that because not only has it been translated into Marathi, I've got good feedback from, through the translator, so on and so forth. And I had come to Pune for the launch of the Marathi edition. So I'm very, very happy to be here. So what is In Good Faith about? Is it about an idealism, about something unreal which doesn't exist anymore? It is, I feel like that sometimes because my main job is to cover national politics, which is run with language which is very, very divisive. I myself have been the target of online campaigns, and I've even faced some cases. But that is not the story here. But I am not never my own story. But we are, as I speak to you right now, we do have a culture of hate speech, which has gained acceptability and so on, so forth in India. Yet, the idea is, and this is something that I learned from my own father, because he has always talked about these themes, and he spoke to you earlier about Afghanistan. So it was actually, when I did this work, it was not that I argue with him all the time. So it's not that I was, but I really felt that what he talked about needed to be fleshed out. Does it exist? Do we have syncretism on the ground? Or is it just a myth, And very often he would talk about it in terms of higher civilizational things, such as poetry and classical traditions, which are not accessible to the common people. So I wanted to know whether it is more at the popular level of religion. So within the family, we had different dimensions of getting into it. Because my father can always tell you the highest form of Urdu poetry, and he's brilliant with that. And I think Vineet Tiwari is nodding his head. But it is still cultures, traditions, and which are accessible to a limited strata of society. My main engagement with this book was to see, is it part of popular cultures? And yes, we have the great religious traditions in India, without a doubt. We have that, but within them survive many popular folk little traditions, which is what I found in the course of these travels, and which is what has always, always remained with me. Even at a time when the world is looking at India as increasingly being a Hinduized nation state, even though people are aware that it has one of the world's largest Muslim populations, it is fascinating to find that there are within this country some such fascinating people, such as those who are both Hindu and Muslim. So again, like I say, I cannot tell you the high poetry or even the high classical traditions. I will tell you just about people who I met on the ground. Some of the most startling things came out of the state of West Bengal. In Maharashtra, I found many shrines which had a joint history, but they were also contested spaces. So let us say that at the time that I was doing my research, there was a history of participation. There was a popular saint-like figure venerated often by both Hindus and Muslims. Yet, very often, the Muslims would abandon that tradition as they became more conscious of what is the correct form of Islam as opposed to the other form of Islam. Even as members of the Hindu society would claim those traditions as their own. And this also certainly applies to the tradition of Satya Sai Baba, not Satya Sai Baba, Shirdi Sai Baba, who is, because he was supposed to be a Muslim fakir, but he is today universally, there is a chapter on him in my book also, how the Sai Baba tradition is propped up by many people who are believers in the narrative of the Hindu Rashtra. Even though this is a Muslim fakir, how it was slowly abandoned by Muslims who were, there were other shrines in Maharashtra that I had found when I had done this field work, where again the same process was underway. There would be a joint ownership of a shrine, and shrines also become places of contestations for their wealth and popularity. Everybody wants to be in on it. Let's, beyond faith, beyond the, beyond all these things. So there was a pushing back of the Muslim community, and very often the Hindu community took over. Often there was political linkages, but let's not go there. Let's talk about, so all of this was happening when I traveled around in Maharashtra. So, but this contested spaces, and all these contested spaces were spaces that were supposed to have powers of magical faith. I pray there and something will come to me. मैं वहां दुआ करूंगी तो कुछ मुझे मिल जाएगा, मन्नत मानने का जो ट्रेडिशन होता है, ये सब था उन जगहों में. लेकिन ये छोड़ के मैं हिंदी, अच्छा अंग्रेजी, I will revert to English. Leaving that aside, let me go and tell you about some amazing things that I find in the state of Bengal. In Bengal, there is a tradition which has been there called the Pattachitra tradition. Pattachitra, Bengal, it is there in Bengal, it is there in Odisha. In Odisha, it is a fairly classical, it is a more Hinduized tradition. In Bengal, the so-called Pattachitra paintings, which are scrolls, जो खोल, जैसे लोग खोलते हैं वैसे वो गाना गाते हैं उनके बारे में, और वो मतलब कथाएं बताते हैं. So they tell the stories of popular folk divinities, legends. Bengal में, in Bengal, the Shakti figures are very popular. I think Narayan Dev, they have their own gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. So the Pattachitra paintings would be these patuas. They were called patuas, who would put them in their bags and they would travel at one point from village to village, opening the scroll and telling the story, and in a song-like form. But naturally the tradition, with everybody having, over the time, first television, then cell phone, and all the ways of entertainments have also been challenged. But so while I was researching it, I went to one particular district, village in a district called Medinapur, which was, the name should be there in my book. But the point is that, anyway, I'll find it. It was a small village of Pattachitra painters. They all said that they were Muslims, but they were also Hindus. They said their real name was Muslim, but their professional name was Hindu. And so you had this entire community of Muslim artists who were singing, painting about Hindu divinities, and who also took on Hindu names. Rahima would be Rupa. Osman would have a Hindu name. I just remember this was some time ago. So you had this kind of identity which didn't belong to any complete sort of a tradition. You had that with the Pattachitra painters. And they were a very, very fascinating kind of community, because actually the Muslim orthodoxy also would not marry with them, would not have intermarriage, so on and so forth. And neither did they belong to mainstream Hindu society. So that was one example. Then within Bengal, because so all of these are actually stories which can be put in a tradition, which can be located, I think, by academics and sociologists as sort of the process of conversion. How much of your original faith do you carry with it? In Bengal, you find a lot of evidence of the Hindu facets of so-called Hindu, quote-unquote, facets of Islam. You find a lot of that still there in Bengal. And so the other tradition, which is very alive even now, is it really takes you no time to go there from Calcutta, is you go to the jungles of Sundarbans. and they have something called a Muslim goddess, you know. So, I mean, Islam is against idol worship, but in the Sundarbans forest, which is tiger infested, where life is very hard, you have a Muslim goddess called Bon Bibi. Bon is the forest, so Ban ki Bibi, Bon Bibi, whose image, everything is like one of the Shakti figures popular in Bengal. It is in makeshift places all over, and people worship her before they go into the forest, be they Hindu or Muslim. That area has a mixed population. It's a very poor population. People enter forests of man-eating tigers. Or the Sundarban tigers are known to be man-eaters. God knows, because it's a very fascinating geographical area, because you have these mangrove. It's the largest mangrove forest in the world, at a point when the Ganges is entering into the ocean. The Sundarbans is divided between India and Bangladesh. It's sort of little islands, little tributaries. You have a village called Bagher Vidwa Gram, meaning बाघ की विधवाओं का ग्राम, जिनको शेर ने खा लिया, उनकी विधवाओं का. You'll see people on the edge of the forest collecting little crabs and fish, standing for hours immersed in water. It is poor. In that stark beauty lies great poverty, and there is a need to worship these magical figures, to pray for survival, to pray against the elements, to pray against the tiger, to pray against the storms, to pray against, just to survive into the next day. So there you'll find something called a Muslim goddess. So all of this exists within this country, from the joint shrines of the state of Maharashtra, from the magical figures of holy men who have become popular in your state, who are now pan-Indian figures. All of that has emerged in the Indian landscape. And then we can move on to Rajasthan, where you have these communities who are musicians, the Manganyar singers, who are again Muslims, but they're intricately linked to the cycle of life ceremonies in Hindu families. They perform in Hindu families at births, weddings, so on and so forth. And some of their music is about Hindu traditions. And so there are, it's like an endless world out there, and of these little things. But the larger question is, does it all add up to anything which challenges the big casting of tradition? I don't have an answer to that. And I don't think in some ways that is even a correct question. Because even when we talk about a great Hindu identity, when we see actual politics, when we see how people split apart into castes, into clans, into communities, you will, that great identity is not, there are so many dimensions to every Indian's identity. So people, when I did this work and when I did this book, there were many friends of mine who challenged me and who said, composite culture does not exist. That it doesn't have any meaning against the larger tide of history. So, I didn't argue, because there's a point of view, and I was never very certain whether I was just chronicling interesting details and putting it together. One of the people who really wanted me to do this, who was a huge encouraging factor, ki you must put it out into a book, was this Professor Ashish Nandi, because he had read those articles. And he said, you need to put it into a book, just so that it's there. These little ground traditions. And I've just spoken to you about some of the better known traditions. In the book are some very obscure, stories about cattle fairs, which involve both communities. There are all sorts of little things. Some of them are being erased, some of them are being divided, but some of them do indeed survive. So, and then to revert back to the classical traditions of, I was looking at just the popular folk traditions, folk forms of worship, folk forms of music, folk living, the joint worship in particular shrines, and so on and so forth. But there is also, the Hindustani classical music tradition, for instance, is nothing but the union. It cannot exist without the union of Hindu and Muslim, the gharanas, the ustads, so on and so forth. And lately, a town of Kairana has been in the news, but Kairana in Uttar Pradesh, but it's also the town which gives the name to the greatest, arguably the greatest gharana of Hindustani classical music, because the founder of that town, a Muslim, leaves Kairana and goes to the court of the Gaikwads of Baroda, where he then falls in love with a member of the family, and they elope and they go to Bombay, and they produce these children who are such accomplished musicians. And then one of his students ends up being the teacher of Bhimsen Joshi and Gangubai Hangar. So the Kairana Gharana, which travels out of Uttar Pradesh, comes to Maharashtra and to the Hubli Dharwad part of Karnataka, where it thrives. And at the foundation is a Muslim ustad with a colorful life and a colorful journey, where he migrates over India and so on and so forth. So our whole traditions, everything is enmeshed with these kind of historical interactions. And I will just rest my case and just look for comments from all of you, or if it's too quick, Kumar sir can take my time. Anyone can do it, Thank you very much.